No outsiders here, Evelyn said, her voice dripping with disdain as she stood in my kitchen doorway. This is family bonding time, and you simply don't qualify. Her words hit me like a slap to the face, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach. The annual family cruise that I had been looking forward to for months was suddenly being torn away from me. My name is Justine, and I'm 35 years old. I work as a marketing coordinator for Gravora Group, a successful advertising agency in Portland, Oregon. For the past 3 years, I've been married to Brian, and I thought I had finally found my place in his family. But standing there in my own home, listening to my mother-in-law explain why I wasn't welcome on their 7-day Caribbean cruise, I realized how wrong I had been. But Evelyn, I've already taken time off work, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been planning for this trip for months. We talked about it at Thanksgiving, and you seemed excited to have me join. She waved her hand dismissively, her perfectly manicured nails catching the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window. Plans change, dear. This year we need to focus on strengthening our family bonds. You understand, don't you? I didn't understand at all. What I understood was that despite 3 years of marriage, despite hosting countless family dinners in this very kitchen, despite bending over backward to gain her approval, I was still considered an outsider. The realization left me feeling hollow and confused. "Where's Brian?" I asked, looking around as if he might materialize to defend me. "Does he know about this change?" "Of course he knows," Evelyn replied with a smug smile that made my skin crawl. "He's the one who suggested we keep it intimate this year. Just the core family members." My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the granite countertop. Brian and I had discussed this cruise extensively. We had picked out excursions together, talked about which formal nights we would attend, even planned romantic moments on the ship's deck under the stars. Now his mother was telling me that he had actively excluded me from these plans. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said weakly, though deep down I felt the crushing weight of betrayal settling in my chest. Evelyn stepped closer, her blue eyes cold and calculating. "There's no misunderstanding, Justine. Some things are more important than hurt feelings. Family legacy, family traditions, family loyalty. These concepts might be difficult for someone like you to grasp." The "someone like you" comment stung worse than everything else combined. It carried years of subtle jabs about my middle-class background, my state school education, and my career in what she called creative fluff. But something about this moment felt different, more final somehow. I sensed there was something darker lurking beneath her usual cruelty. The relationship between Evelyn and me had been strained from the very beginning. When Brian first introduced me to his family at their sprawling estate in the hills outside Portland, I knew I was walking into a world where I didn't belong. The Walsh family had old money, the kind that came with expectations and traditions that stretched back generations. Brian's father, Harrison, had built a successful shipping empire, and the family lived a life of luxury that I could barely comprehend. Their home was filled with antique furniture, original paintings, and crystal that cost more than my annual salary. Evelyn had never worked a day in her life, spending her time organizing charity luncheons and country club events with other wealthy wives. From our first meeting, Evelyn made it clear that she found me lacking. She would ask pointed questions about my family background, my education, and my career prospects. When I told her I had worked my way through college and was proud of my achievements at Gravora Group, she smiled politely, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. "How quaint," she had said. "Brian has always been drawn to charity cases." Despite her obvious disapproval, I had tried everything to win her over. I hosted elegant dinner parties, bought thoughtful gifts for every occasion, and even took cooking classes to prepare Brian's favorite meals. I studied wine pairings and learned about art history so I could contribute to her conversations. Nothing I did seemed to matter. Brian, for his part, seemed oblivious to his mother's treatment of me. When I brought up her cutting remarks or deliberate exclusions, he would brush off my concerns with phrases like, "That's just how she is," or "She'll come around eventually." He loved his mother deeply and couldn't see past her charm to the calculating woman underneath. The family cruise had become an annual tradition 5 years ago, shortly after Harrison's retirement. Every summer, the extended Walsh family would charter a luxury cruise ship for a week of bonding and relaxation. There would be elaborate dinners, deck parties, and excursions to exotic locations. Last year, as a newlywed, I had been included and had genuinely enjoyed myself despite Evelyn's constant passive-aggressive comments. This year was supposed to be different. Evelyn had seemed warmer toward me during the holiday season, and I had dared to hope that I was finally being accepted into the family fold. We had spent hours planning activities and discussing which formal gowns we would wear to the captain's dinner. I had even bought a new wardrobe specifically for the trip, spending money I couldn't really afford to ensure I looked appropriate for the Walsh family image. Now, standing in my kitchen listening to her explain why I wasn't welcome, I felt like a fool for believing things had changed. But there was something in her demeanor that suggested this wasn't just about family bonding. Her eyes held a secretive gleam that made me deeply uneasy. "When does the ship depart?" I asked quietly. "Next Saturday," she replied, "from the port of Seattle. But don't worry about the details, dear. You won't be needing them." After Evelyn left, I sat alone in my kitchen feeling like my world had been turned upside down. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the steady tick of the antique clock that Brian's grandmother had given us as a wedding gift. Even that seemed to mock me now, a reminder of a family history I would apparently never truly be part of. I tried calling Brian's office, but his assistant informed me he was in meetings all afternoon and couldn't be disturbed. This struck me as odd since he usually made time for my calls, especially when something important was happening. The more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became about the timing of Evelyn's announcement. Unable to focus on anything else, I found myself pacing through our beautifully decorated home, a house that Brian had insisted we purchase in an upscale neighborhood to maintain the family's image. Every room was filled with expensive furniture and artwork that we had received as wedding gifts from his family. Now those items felt like chains, reminders of obligations and expectations that I could never fulfill. The worst part was the humiliation. I had already told my colleagues at Gravora Group about the cruise, sharing my excitement about visiting the Caribbean islands and experiencing the luxury of a private family charter. My supervisor, Mr. Davidson, had been particularly supportive when I requested the vacation time, understanding how important family relationships were to overall happiness and job performance. How could I explain to everyone that I had been disinvited from my own family's vacation? The thought of facing those conversations made my stomach churn with embarrassment. As evening approached, I heard Brian's car pull into the driveway. My heart raced as I prepared to confront him about what his mother had told me. Surely there had been some misunderstanding. Surely the man I loved and trusted wouldn't exclude me from something so important without at least discussing it with me first. Brian walked through the front door, looking exhausted, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled and his tie loosened around his neck. When he saw me waiting in the foyer, his expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Was it guilt? Annoyance? Or something else entirely? "We need to talk," I said before he could speak. "Justine, I know what you're going to say," he replied, setting down his briefcase with more force than necessary. "Mother told me she spoke with you today." "Then you know how upset I am," I said, searching his face for any sign of remorse. "Brian, we planned this trip together. I've been looking forward to it for months. How could you exclude me without even discussing it with me?" His silence stretched between us like a chasm, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. In that moment of hesitation, I realized that my worst fears were probably true. This wasn't a misunderstanding at all. Brian ran his hand through his hair and avoided meeting my eyes. A gesture I had learned over 3 years of marriage meant he was about to say something I wouldn't want to hear. "Look, Justine, this is complicated. There are family dynamics at play that you don't fully understand. Then explain them to me, I said, feeling my voice rise despite my efforts to stay calm. I'm your wife, Brian. I deserve to understand why I'm being excluded from family events. He loosened his tie completely and walked past me toward the living room, where he poured himself a generous glass of whiskey from the crystal decanter his father had given him for his 30th birthday. The amber liquid caught the light from the chandelier above, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he lifted the glass to his lips. It's not permanent, he said finally. Mother just thinks it would be better this year if we focused on some family business matters. Boring stuff, really. You'd probably be miserable listening to us discuss shipping contracts and investment portfolios all week. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you seriously trying to convince me that you're doing me a favor by excluding me? Brian, we're married. Your family business is my family business too. That's not exactly how it works in families like mine, he replied. And there was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. There are traditions, protocols, ways of doing things that have been established for generations. I felt like I was seeing my husband clearly for the first time. The man I had fallen in love with during our college years had seemed different then, more independent and less concerned with his family's approval. But the longer we had been married, the more he had reverted to the privileged son who believed his mother's word was law. So what am I supposed to do while you're all bonding and discussing business? I asked. Sit home alone for a week like some abandoned pet? You could visit your mother, he suggested weakly. Didn't you say she's been wanting you to come to Phoenix for a longer visit? The fact that he was already making alternative plans for me confirmed my suspicion that this decision had been made long before today. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment change of plans. This was a carefully orchestrated exclusion that had been discussed and decided without any input from me. How long have you known about this? I demanded. Brian's silence was answer enough. I watched him drain his whiskey glass and pour another, his movements jerky and defensive. The golden liquid sloshed slightly as his hand trembled, and I realized he was more nervous about this conversation than he was letting on. Brian, answer me. How long have you known that I wasn't going on this cruise? A few weeks, he admitted finally. But I wanted to find the right way to tell you. I knew you'd be upset. A few weeks? I repeated, my voice rising to a pitch that surprised even me. You've known for weeks that your family was planning to exclude me, and you said nothing? We've been talking about this trip every day. I bought new clothes. I rearranged my entire work schedule. I turned down other vacation opportunities because I thought we were going on this cruise together. I know, and I'm sorry, he said. But his apology felt hollow and rehearsed. Look, next year will be different. Once some of these family issues are resolved, you'll be included in everything again. The promise of future inclusion felt like a consolation prize, and I wasn't interested in accepting it. Something about this entire situation felt wrong, and my instincts were screaming that there was more to this story than family business discussions. What family issues? I pressed. What could possibly be so sensitive that your wife of 3 years can't be present? Brian's face flushed red, and he set down his glass with enough force that I worried it might shatter. Justine, please just trust me on this. Some things are better left alone. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Brian slept peacefully beside me, apparently unburdened by the conversation that had left me feeling completely betrayed. The more I thought about the situation, the more suspicious I became. In 3 years of marriage, I had never been excluded from a single family event, even the most mundane business dinners and charity functions. The next morning, Brian left for work early without saying goodbye, leaving only a hastily written note saying he would be working late and not to wait up for dinner. His avoidance felt like another betrayal, confirming that he knew his behavior was indefensible. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, but I couldn't imagine trying to focus on marketing campaigns when my personal life was falling apart. Instead, I spent the morning trying to piece together what might be happening. I reviewed our recent conversations, looking for clues about what kind of family business could be so secretive. Around noon, desperation drove me to do something I had never done before. I called the cruise line directly. If I was going to be excluded from this trip, I at least wanted to understand the logistics. Maybe knowing more details would help me figure out what was really happening. Good afternoon. This is Mediterranean Luxury Cruises. This is Jennifer speaking. How may I help you today? The voice on the other end was cheerful and professional. Hi, I'm calling about a family booking for a cruise departing from Seattle next Saturday. The reservation should be under Walsh. Of course. Let me look that up for you. Can you provide me with a first name for the primary reservation holder? Harrison Walsh, I said, naming Brian's father, who typically handled all the family's travel arrangements. Perfect. I have that reservation right here. It's for the 7-day Caribbean charter on the Sapphire Princess. Is there something specific I can help you with regarding this booking? My heart was pounding, but I tried to keep my voice casual. I just wanted to confirm the passenger list. There have been some last-minute changes, and I want to make sure everything is accurate. Certainly. I show Harrison Walsh, Evelyn Walsh, Brian Walsh, and... There was a pause, and I heard the sound of typing. Ashley Walsh, 4 passengers total in the presidential suite. The name hit me like a physical blow. Ashley Walsh, Brian's ex-girlfriend from college, the woman he had dated for 2 years before we met. The woman his mother had always believed was a better match for him because she came from an equally prestigious family background. I'm sorry, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Did you say Ashley Walsh? Yes, that's correct. Is there an issue with the registration? My mind was reeling. Ashley wasn't even married to anyone in the Walsh family. How could she possibly be registered as family when I, Brian's actual wife, had been excluded for not being family enough? No issue, I said quickly. Thank you for your help. I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence in my kitchen, the same room where Evelyn had delivered her cruel message about outsiders not being welcome. Now I understood why she had seemed so secretive, and why Brian had been so defensive. This wasn't about family bonding or business discussions. This was about something much more personal and devastating. Ashley Walsh. The name echoed in my mind as pieces of a horrifying puzzle began falling into place. Brian had been acting strangely for months, working late more often, taking phone calls in private, being less affectionate and attentive at home. I had attributed it to work stress, but now I was beginning to suspect something much worse. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of shock, trying to process what I had learned. Ashley Walsh was going on my family's cruise, registered under the Walsh name as if she belonged there more than I did. The implications were staggering and heartbreaking. Ashley had been Brian's college girlfriend, the daughter of a prominent banking family who had fit seamlessly into the Walsh social circle. She was everything Evelyn had wanted in a daughter-in-law. Well-bred, wealthy, and appropriately connected. When Brian had chosen me over her, I thought it was because he loved me for who I was rather than what I represented. Now I was beginning to wonder if that choice had ever been real, or if it had simply been a temporary rebellion against his family's expectations. I tried calling Brian's office again, but his assistant informed me that he was in client meetings all day and couldn't be reached. The convenient unavailability felt deliberate now, like he was hiding from the consequences of his deception. Unable to sit still, I drove to my best friend Caroline's house across town. Caroline and I had been friends since college, and she was one of the few people who knew both Brian and Ashley from our university days. If anyone could help me make sense of this situation, it would be her. Justine, what's wrong? Caroline asked the moment she opened her front door. You look like you've seen a ghost. I collapsed onto her couch and told her everything. Evelyn's announcement, Brian's defensive behavior, and the devastating phone call to the cruise line. Caroline listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. Oh, honey, she said when I finished. I was hoping I wouldn't have to be the one to tell you this. My blood turned to ice. Tell me what? Caroline hesitated, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. I've seen Brian and Ashley together. At lunch last month, and again at that new wine bar downtown. They were sitting very close, holding hands across the table. The confirmation of my worst fears felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about it every day, she said, her eyes filling with tears. But I kept hoping I was misreading the situation. Maybe they were just discussing business, or maybe she was going through a difficult time and needed a friend. I didn't want to destroy your marriage over what might have been innocent interactions. Innocent? I laughed bitterly. She's going on our family cruise, Caroline. She's registered as a Walsh family member while I'm being excluded as an outsider. Caroline reached over and took my hand. I'm so sorry, Justine. I should have said something sooner. I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. The man I had loved and trusted for years had been lying to me, carrying on with his ex-girlfriend while maintaining the pretense of a happy marriage. His mother had been complicit in the deception, perhaps even encouraging it. What am I going to do? I asked, feeling lost and confused. First, you're going to gather evidence, Caroline said firmly. If Brian is having an affair and planning to leave you for Ashley, you need to protect yourself legally and financially. Do you have access to his phone records, credit card statements, anything that might document his relationship with her? The practical considerations hadn't even occurred to me yet. I had been so focused on the emotional betrayal that I hadn't thought about the potential financial and legal implications of Brian's deception. I need to go home, I said, standing up abruptly. I need to figure out what's really been happening in my own marriage. That evening, when Brian came home from his mysteriously long day of meetings, I was waiting for him in the living room with a glass of wine, and what I hoped looked like a calm expression. I had spent hours planning this conversation, and I knew I had only one chance to get the truth from him. How was your day? I asked casually as he walked through the door. Long, he replied, loosening his tie in the gesture that had once seemed endearing but now felt like a tell. Lots of client issues to resolve before next week. Speaking of next week, I said, taking a sip of wine. I've been thinking about the cruise situation, and I want to apologize for overreacting yesterday. You're right that I probably wouldn't enjoy listening to family business discussions all week. Brian's face visibly relaxed, and he moved to pour himself a whiskey. I'm glad you understand. I know Mother can be difficult sometimes, but she really does have the family's best interests at heart. Of course she does, I agreed. I was actually thinking it might be nice to use that week to visit my mother in Phoenix like you suggested. Maybe this is the perfect opportunity for some mother-daughter bonding time of my own. That sounds wonderful, Brian said, and his relief was palpable. I think you'll really enjoy that. I watched him carefully as I delivered my next line. I'm curious, though, who else is going on the cruise? Just the immediate family? Or will there be other relatives joining you? Brian's hand paused halfway to his mouth, and I saw a flicker of panic cross his features. Just the core family, he said quickly. Mother, father, and me. How intimate, I replied, keeping my voice light despite the rage building inside me. 3 people on a ship designed for hundreds. You'll have plenty of privacy for those important business discussions. Exactly, he said, though he no longer met my eyes. I had my confirmation. Brian was actively lying to my face about Ashley's presence on the cruise. Whatever was happening between them, he was determined to keep it hidden from me. The next morning, I called Mediterranean Luxury Cruises again, this time with a different plan. I had spent the night researching the cruise line and their policies, and I had discovered something interesting about their booking procedures. Good morning. This is Mediterranean Luxury Cruises. This is David speaking. How may I assist you today? Hi, David. I'm calling about a booking for the Walsh family cruise departing Saturday. I need to make some changes to the passenger manifest. Certainly. Can you provide me with the confirmation number or the primary account holder's information for verification? The primary account holder is Harrison Walsh, I said. However, I'm calling because there's been a significant error in the booking that needs immediate attention. What kind of error? One of the passengers listed, Ashley Walsh, is not actually a family member. She's been fraudulently registered using our family name, and we need her removed from the booking immediately. There was a pause as David processed this information. That's quite serious, ma'am. Are you saying someone has attempted to use your family's reservation fraudulently? That's exactly what I'm saying, I replied. Ashley Walsh has no legal right to use the Walsh family name or to be included in our family booking. This is a case of identity fraud that could have serious legal implications for your cruise line, if not corrected immediately. I understand your concern. Can you hold while I speak with my supervisor about the proper procedure for handling this type of situation? Of course, I said, feeling a surge of satisfaction. I'll wait. When David returned to the line, his tone was more serious. Ma'am, my supervisor has instructed me to remove the passenger in question from the booking effective immediately. We take fraud very seriously, and we appreciate you bringing this to our attention. Thank you, I said. I trust this matter will be handled with appropriate discretion. The first phase of my plan was complete. Ashley would arrive at the port on Saturday morning to discover that she was no longer welcome on the Walsh family cruise. But I wasn't finished yet. Brian and his mother had orchestrated this betrayal together, and they both needed to face the consequences of their deception. That afternoon, I made another phone call, this time to Harrison Walsh's office. Brian's father had always been kind to me, and I suspected he might not be fully aware of what his wife and son were planning. Mr. Walsh, I said when his assistant connected the call. This is Justine. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I wanted to discuss something important about the family cruise next week. Of course, Justine. What can I help you with? I recently discovered that Ashley Walsh has been registered for the cruise. I wanted to make sure you were aware that Brian and I are going through some marital difficulties, and it might be inappropriate for his ex-girlfriend to be included in what I understood was meant to be a family bonding experience. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Harrison had no idea that Ashley was supposed to be joining them on the cruise. I think there may have been some confusion, he said finally. Let me look into this matter and get back to you. Thank you, I replied. I appreciate your understanding during this difficult time. I hung up the phone knowing that the Walsh family was about to have some very uncomfortable conversations. Harrison would confront Evelyn and Brian about Ashley's inclusion, forcing them to explain their deception. The carefully planned romantic getaway was turning into a family crisis. But I still had one more move to make, the most important one of all. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Braxford Legal Associates, the premier divorce law firm in Portland. It was time to protect myself and ensure that Brian's betrayal would have lasting consequences. Good afternoon. This is Attorney Patricia Braxford speaking. Attorney Braxford, my name is Justine Walsh, and I need to discuss filing for divorce. I've recently discovered that my husband is having an affair, and I believe he's planning to leave me for another woman. I'm sorry to hear about your situation, Justine. Can you come in this afternoon to discuss the details? Yes, I said, feeling a sense of determination replace the devastation I had been carrying for days. I'll be there within the hour. In the weeks that followed, the Walsh family's carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the weight of their own deceptions. Harrison, furious about being kept in the dark about Ashley's inclusion and the marital problems, canceled the entire cruise and demanded a full accounting of Brian's relationship with his ex-girlfriend. Evelyn, faced with her husband's anger and the collapse of her schemes, found herself isolated within her own family as Harrison began to question her other manipulations over the years. Brian, caught between his affair and his family's disappointment, lost not only his marriage, but also his position in the family business when Harrison discovered that company resources had been used to fund his secret meetings with Ashley. The man who had once seemed so confident and entitled now faced the prospect of rebuilding his life without the safety net of family wealth and approval. As I signed the final divorce papers 6 months later, I reflected on how this painful journey had ultimately led me to discover my own strength and independence. I had learned that some betrayals, while devastating in the moment, can become the catalyst for a better life built on truth and self-respect. Looking back on my revenge against those who had tried to exclude and deceive me, I realized that the best justice had been simply refusing to remain a victim of their cruelty.